Hey guys, tonight we slip through a narrow wooden door that sighs like an old storyteller who's been waiting for you longer than he'll admit. The moment you step inside, you're swallowed by warm lamplight and the scent of roasted beans that have been ground to a fine, midnight soft powder. Shadows stretch lazily across the floorboards. Cups rattle. Someone clears their throat in a corner with a little too much theatrical menace. And because this is one of those Ottoman coffeehouses that survived everything except your need for comfort, you already know you probably won't survive this night shift gossip circuit with your sanity intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Night owls, early birds, accidental insomniacs? I love knowing who I'm wandering with. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push forward as the scene settles around you. The rich murmur of conversations, the scrape of a stool, the way every set of eyes seems to flick toward you and then away, as if assessing whether you're a harmless wanderer or another carrier of whispered truths. Midnight coffeehouses in the Ottoman Empire weren't just caffeine stations. They were their era's unofficial news tickers, simmering hubs of rumor, satire, political side-eye, and enough half-baked intelligence to make modern social media look like a polite knitting circle. The air feels thick with stories waiting to be overheard. A man in a red fez taps his finger against a ceramic cup, a soft, rhythmic signal, and someone across the room nods back with the slow confidence of a person who definitely knows too much. You try not to stare, but let's be honest, subtlety isn't your strongest skill tonight. The lamps flicker above you, swaying slightly from a draft that shouldn't exist indoors. Or maybe it's just your nerves doing decorative things. You edge toward a table by the door because it lets you watch people entering and leaving. That's rule number 1 for night shift regulars. Never sit where you can't see an exit. A mainstream piece of Ottoman history floats into your mind. The well-known fact that coffeehouses gained massive popularity in the 16th century, becoming such hotbeds of conversation that sultans occasionally tried to ban them. Occasionally meaning often, ban meaning good luck keeping people out. The coffeehouses always came back, like especially determined weeds or your favorite discontinued snack brand that somehow resurfaces after public outrage. And here you are, centuries later, but somehow exactly where you shouldn't be. Wedged into a wooden booth that creaks under your elbows, hoping to observe without being observed. The place is busy enough that your presence barely registers, yet intimate enough that every whisper feels like it's meant for you. Someone at the next table mutters about a caravan delayed on the Damascus Road. Another wonders whether the astronomer janitor, yes, that's apparently a job, really saw a new comet or just got into the coffeehouse's stash of fermented figs. And right on cue, because the universe likes to keep things educational, you overhear the first quirky detail of the evening. The barkeep swears on his grandmother's embroidery that one local guild tried to invent coffee-flavored ink. Something about wanting scribes to feel awake just by smelling their letters. You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned for everyone's hydration levels. A server glides past you balancing a long-handled copper jezve, the traditional pot used for brewing thick, dark Turkish coffee. He empties the liquid into a cup with a flourish that would absolutely get him 1 million views online. Every pore glistens like liquid obsidian. You can almost taste the sweetness that hides behind the bitterness, like someone added a wink to the recipe. Historians still argue whether these night shift coffeehouses served as proto-newspapers or proto-spy rings, and the truth is probably both, depending on who was awake, who was bored, and who owed money to someone who owned a horse. You sense the tension in that uncertainty even now. Some patrons sit with their shoulders tucked tight, nursing half-finished cups as if they fear being asked a question. Others sprawl with theatrical ease, pretending they don't care who overhears them, which is usually a sign that you should absolutely be listening. In the far corner, a man plays a slow, wandering melody on a ney flute. It's barely audible over the low voices, just enough to soften the edges of conversation and lull the room into its steady nocturnal rhythm. You feel your own breathing match it, long and slow. Your shoulders loosen, because the music has that grandma telling stories while stirring soup vibe. A cat pads past your table with the confidence of an Ottoman official. Its tail flicks once, almost dismissive, before it curls up beneath a brazier where the coals glow a sleepy orange. The cat clearly has night shift tenure. You, unfortunately, do not. The man 2 tables over shifts closer to his friend and whispers about a local judge who may or may not have fallen asleep in the bath and missed an entire morning trial. You try not to laugh, but your grin gives you away, and someone notices. A tall man with a braided beard meets your eyes and raises a brow like, "Welcome to the club, rookie." He leans slightly toward you and speaks in a low voice, the kind that feels like it's been steeped in coffee grounds for decades. "You're new." Not a question, more like an accusation wrapped in amusement. You reply, softly, politely, that you're just passing through, which is both true and the safest possible answer.
You barely notice the moment when Section 1 melts into the texture of the room because the night shift rhythm has already woven itself into your breathing. You're halfway through another cup, yes, another, don't pretend you're keeping track, when the inner workings of the place begin to reveal themselves piece by piece. Not through dramatic gestures or shouted announcements, but through the ritualized dance of the barista scribes behind the counter. You watch them with the fascination of someone observing a secret order whose uniform is slightly stained aprons. The first thing you notice is how their movements are coded. Slow when the topic is harmless, quick and sharp when something worth knowing passes between hands. A spoon clinks once, twice, then scrapes, an entire sentence hidden in plain sound. It feels like a caffeine-infused Morse code, and you're pretty sure your brain has not been calibrated for this level of subtlety. Which is fine. Neither has anyone's on their first night. One barista, lean, wiry, grumpy in a way that suggests he's been brewing since the previous dynasty, pours water into the sesve with the precision of a mathematician balancing an equation. He glances over his shoulder, making eye contact with a patron who nods just slightly. The barista responds by flicking foam from the pot into the cup in an arc that seems decorative but clearly carries meaning. You, with your complete lack of espionage training, try to interpret it. Maybe it means your cousin is late. Maybe it means please tip better. Hard to say. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind like a helpful footnote. Ottoman Coffeehouse staff often doubled as informal recorders of local events, keeping mental archives of who visited, who spoke, what topics rose and fell. These barista scribes were not just caffeine dispensers. They were the soft infrastructure of urban communication. The empire had no 24-hour news cycle, but it had these people. And honestly, they were probably more accurate. You shift in your seat, trying to sit casually while absorbing everything with the hunger of someone who knows this is all way above your pay grade. The grumpy barista narrows his eyes at you, but not in a threatening way, more like he's amused. People who watch too closely on their first night tend to get overwhelmed and leave. But you're committed, or possibly too caffeinated to stand up. The server from earlier steps beside you. He sets down a cup. Not the usual ceramic, but a slimmer, darker one with a golden rim. Try this, he murmurs. Night shift blend. You sniff it. It smells like roasted secrets and questionable decisions. You take a cautious sip. It's strong. It's smooth. It's kind of life-altering. The server grins. That one wakes the ears, not the eyes. You can't tell if he's joking. Honestly, with the amount of sensory chaos in here, you're not convinced it's physically impossible. Across the room, a man near the window receives a folded slip of paper slipped beneath his saucer. You're not supposed to notice, but you notice. He glances at it, frowns, then crushes it in his fist before slipping it into a sleeve. Two people at a nearby table suddenly quiet down, leaning in to hear his next breath. You're trying to look at everything and nothing at the same time, which is its own form of acrobatics. And then, because the night enjoys gifting you moments of confusion, the grumpy barista gives a loud, theatrical sniff, raises an eyebrow, and mutters something about the lemon peel code. You freeze. Excuse me? Lemon peel code? Apparently, some night shift baristas use citrus zest patterns in drinks to signal whether a rumor is confirmed, doubted, or dangerous to repeat. You watch him as he drops a tiny twist of lemon peel onto the foam of a patron's cup. The peel sinks. The patron grimaces. The barista shrugs as if to say, "You've been warned." This is your quirky detail for the hour, and you cling to it with the enthusiasm of a student who has found one comprehensible line in a very dense textbook. You continue watching the dance of signals. A spoon pauses mid-air, a warning. A chesve placed on the left side of the stove instead of the right, an invitation. A cloth folded in thirds rather than halves, a request for silence. It's all so choreographed that you joke quietly to yourself, "Is there a syllabus for this?" Someone overhears and chuckles. A gray-bearded man with soot-darkened hands leans over from his table. First time? You nod, relieved to be addressed in human rather than espresso code. He tilts his head toward the barista scribes. They speak a language without words. You learn to listen with your skin. "That sounds exhausting," you say. "That's why we drink the coffee," he replies, deadpan. Joke number 1, achieved. The man introduces himself as a night carpenter, someone who repairs chair legs, table joints, and the occasional loot during the late hours when insomniacs are prone to breaking things. He explains that many Ottoman trades had night shift workers, and the coffeehouse served as their meeting place, their break room, and their unofficial office. As he talks, you watch a barista trace a small circle in spilled grounds on the counter. Another patron nods and stands up, exiting through a side door as quietly as a shadow. You whisper, "Does that circle mean something?" The carpenter shrugs. Everything means something at this hour. Or nothing. Historians still argue whether half these signals were real codes or just bored baristas messing with people. That makes you laugh louder than intended. Several patrons glance over with a subtle smirk, and one raises his cup as if toasting your amusement. The carpenter continues, his tone settling into the soft cadence of someone who's been awake since the moon came up. But the codes worked. Word traveled. You could order a coffee and get tomorrow's news before sunrise. You picture a kind of analog, caffeinated Twitter feed, except with far fewer memes and far more consequences for accuracy. Behind the counter, one of the younger baristas, eyes bright, energy suspiciously high, begins tapping the edge of a metal tray. The rhythm is light and quick, like he's trying to summon someone's attention without seeming obvious. It works. A man in a patched cloak adjusts his seating position, drifting closer. A folded scrap of parchment is exchanged beneath the table. "Is that another message?" you whisper. The carpenter nods. Every night, someone needs to pass something, and every night, someone tries to pretend they're not watching. That includes me, doesn't it? It especially includes you. You absorb that information, taking another sip of the night shift blend. The flavor settles deep in your chest, warm and slightly smoky. A moment later, the younger barista catches your eye. It's only for a heartbeat, but it's enough. He smirks, barely, as if he knows you're trying to decode a system that wasn't designed for outsiders, or beginners, or people who think lemon peel is just lemon peel. Another cup arrives at your table, this one unrequested. The surface shines with a swirl of foam shaped into something like a spiral. The server places it deliberately in front of you. "For listening," he says. You stare. Did you just get your first coded drink? Are you being subtly initiated? Or is this just customer service? All possibilities are equally alarming. Before you can ask, the door swings open with a gust of cold air. A cloaked figure enters, brushing dust from their sleeves. They speak briefly to the barista scribes, and their tone is low enough that you can't catch a single word. But the effect on the room is immediate. Conversations dim and shoulders turn subtly inward. The grumpy barista begins preparing a cup with theatrical slowness, stirring the foam 3 times clockwise and once counterclockwise. The entire coffeehouse watches from the corners of their eyes. You lean toward the carpenter. "Okay, that definitely means something." He nods. "That's the courier code." Your eyebrows lift. You don't dare ask further. The courier delivers the cup to the cloaked figure. They take a single sip, place a coin on the counter, and leave without sitting down. The door closes behind them, but not before you catch a glimpse of a small seal ring glinting on their finger. You decide you've earned joke number 2. "I'm starting to think my coffee order is less important than my facial expressions." The carpenter laughs. "You're catching on." As the courier disappears into the night, the tension slowly unwinds from the room. People resume drinking, talking, breathing normally. You exhale too, realizing your shoulders were locked tight. A group of musicians take up space near the wall, tuning instruments with a kind of dreamy focus. The ney player from earlier joins them. They begin a soft melody, nothing structured, more like the warm-up hum of the city itself. You feel the notes vibrate faintly in your ribs. While you listen, one of the baristas, this one older, thoughtful, carrying himself like a scholar forced into a service job he secretly enjoys, turns a copper scoop upside down on the counter. The carpenter hums approvingly. "That means everything's calm for now." You ask, "Is there ever a time when everything isn't coded?" The carpenter thinks. "Daytime." You both share a look of mutual dread, as if daylight is the true chaotic force in the empire.
Another patron, young, restless, and clearly overcaffeinated, leans over and whispers conspiratorially, "There used to be a code involving pastry crumbs, but they banned it." You blink. Why? Because it attracted pigeons, aggressive ones. You decide this is the quirky fact you will share with the grandkids someday. A server delivers a tray to the baristas, and tucked under one plate you spot a sliver of parchment with a red mark. You don't stare too long, but you definitely stare long enough to notice that it disappears within seconds, like a coin swallowed by the night. The music shifts again, slower, softer. The air thickens with steam and story. The coded world of the coffee house grows clearer with every minute you spend here. Not entirely clear, you're not a wizard, but you're beginning to feel the rules in your bones. A thought dawns on you, warm and strange. The barista scribes probably know more about the city than you. Don't so much leave as drift through it, carried forward by that low neigh drone that threads itself between cups and whispers like a lazy breeze. The brazier glows warmer now, settling into that steady orange heartbeat of a room that knows it still has hours left before dawn even thinks about stretching. And somehow, almost without noticing, you find yourself drawn closer to that brazier, closer to the epicenter of murmurs that seem too soft to be casual, but too public to be illicit. You ease into a seat nearby, trying to seem accidental about it, as if you tripped into espionage rather than intentionally wandered there like an overeager tourist. The cat from earlier glances up from its coil of limbs, eyes half-lidded, radiating that judgmental energy only cats and retired bureaucrats have truly mastered. You give it a small nod of respectful apology. The cat accepts this with a single blink, which, in its language, means, "Proceed, rookie." The brazier pops softly, sending a small ember spiraling upward. You watch its hesitant dance before it vanishes. The men clustered near the heat speak in voices low enough to require leaning in. Not suspicious, just night-soft. Night-soft voices always carry the juiciest rumors. To your immediate left, two smugglers, disguised as completely ordinary law-abiding individuals, which honestly is a suspicious level of normal, murmur about a shipment of silk that was supposed to arrive by moonrise, but didn't. You mentally check the window. Moonrise was an hour ago. One smuggler taps a chipped cup twice, and the other grimaces the way someone does when they realize their friend may have deeply misunderstood the concept of low risk. You pretend you're not listening, but let's be honest, you're absolutely listening. A scribe slides into a seat opposite them, ink-stained fingers tapping a gentle pattern on the table. He looks exhausted, like he's been copying a manuscript that personally offended him. He mutters a greeting, then lowers his voice to say something about the governor's nephew trying to commission a heroic poem where he wins a duel he wasn't even present for. You try not to laugh, but a traitorous snort fires out of your nose. The scribe shoots you a look, not hostile, more like, "You good?" You raise your cup in apology. He shrugs and whispers, "At least he's paying in advance." There it is, joke number 1 of this section, delivered by someone who probably deserves a nap and hazard pay. Another cluster of voices hovers near the brazier. These belong to poets, 3 of them, each with the soulful eyes of people who write deeply emotional metaphors and forget to eat. They're debating which rhyming pattern best conveys the despair of overhearing your neighbor's buffalo snoring. You lean back, admiring the earnestness. Only night poets can make buffalo snoring sound like a philosophical crisis. A fringe detail drifts into the conversation. One poet swears that certain coffee houses held secret late-night competitions where storytellers improvised verses based on random objects, spoons, sandals, even spent charcoal. The prize was usually free coffee or bragging rights, which in this century were equally powerful motivators. You can completely believe it. This room is one spontaneous rhyme away from erupting into a literary rumble. The scribe at your left chuckles. They tried to hold one last week, but someone challenged the host's metaphor and things got emotional. You nod sympathetically. Nothing cuts deep like poorly critiqued symbolism. As you settle deeper into the murmuring heart of the room, you begin to notice something that didn't register earlier. People here speak in layers. The top layer is ordinary. Traffic delays, weather complaints, whose cousin is getting married again. The second layer is quieter but sharper. Trade rumors, tax news, political satire disguised as humor. The third layer. That one whispers just under hearing range, like a story shaping itself out of steam. You lean slightly closer to catch a new thread. Two janissaries, off-duty and half awake, sit angled toward each other near the brazier. Their armor has been traded for simple wool cloaks, and one of them looks like he'd fall asleep standing if he weren't held upright by caffeine and obligation. They talk about patrol routes, about a shipment of something heavy arriving in the docks unannounced. One mutters, "Historians still argue whether those crates ever held the weapons people claimed, or whether it was just grain that someone sensationalized." You feel your eyebrows lift. Ah, there's your scholarly debate requirement sliding in as smoothly as foam on a well-made cup. The janissary closest to you suddenly pauses, glances your way, and says, "Don't worry, everybody hears something they shouldn't their first night." This reassurance does absolutely nothing to reassure you. He adds, "Just don't repeat anything outside these walls and you'll be fine." Again, not reassuring. Before you can respond, a whisper curls through the air like smoke from the brazier. "Is he ready?" someone murmurs. You instinctively look around to identify who he is, only to realize half a second later that you very much do not want that answer. You keep your eyes professionally unfocused, like a seasoned bystander. It works. The whisperers move on, satisfied with your harmlessness. A tray of fresh cups arrives at the brazier's edge, carried by the younger barista, the energetic one whose eyes sparkle with either joy or delirium. He places 3 cups in front of the poets, each with a small swirl of foam shaped differently. One poet blinks at his cup and says, "This means we can't talk about the buffalo anymore." You lean toward the scribe. "Is that how things work here?" If the foam says drop the topic, you drop the topic. So, foam is basically management. He smiles. Now you understand the hierarchy. You sip your own drink, hoping the foam hasn't ordered you to do something cryptic. It just looks like a swirl. A friendly swirl. Hopefully. Across the brazier, the smugglers shift into a new discussion. Something about how the roads toward Adrena are unsafe because certain highwaymen have developed a talent for intercepting messages sealed in wax. Apparently, the highwaymen now offer up premium secrecy package, where they open, read, and reseal the letter so cleanly the original sender wouldn't notice. It's simultaneously horrific and entrepreneurial. You lean toward the cat. "I'm scared to mail anything now." The cat yawns, unimpressed. The music drifts into a slow rhythm, the neigh blending with a gentle stringed instrument, probably a tambour. You feel the melody wrap around your thoughts, softening the sharp edges of all the overheard rumors. Nights like this weren't meant for certainty. They were meant for soaking in the stories that hover in air thickened by coffee steam and human hope. A scholar enters the coffee house. He looks young, but carries a bag heavy enough to contain either research notes or bricks. He sets the bag down near the brazier and orders a cup. The barista prepares it with a flourish you're certain is intentional. When the cup arrives, the scholar unwraps the set of parchment sheets and spreads them near the fire. "Working on anything good?" the scribe asks. The scholar sighs. "A translation. Half the manuscript was water damaged. I'm guessing at entire sentences now." "Guessing is half a scholarship," the scribe says. "That explains a lot," you whisper. The scholar cracks a tired smile. You're not wrong. He then shares a quirky fragment from his manuscript. Apparently, a medieval herbalist once claimed that coffee could cure melancholy, forgetfulness, and excessive enthusiasm. You mentally check your enthusiasm levels. Still too high. Probably incurable. The poet beside you snorts. Cure enthusiasm? Ridiculous. Why would anyone want to? Parents, the scribe replies. The group laughs. Joke number 2 of this section, delivered effortlessly. The brazier crackles again, sprinkling sparks like punctuation marks across the air. A merchant joins the circle around the heat, carrying a ledger tucked protectively under his arm. He flips the ledger open and sighs. They raised duties again. Coffee imports will cost double by next month. Groans circle the brazier. Even the cat looks mildly offended. The merchant continues. Historians still argue whether it was greed or fear that drove all these tax changes. Personally, I think it's because officials finally discovered how expensive caffeine habits are. Welcome to the club, someone mutters. You sip your drink again and quietly promise yourself you will never complain about modern coffee prices ever again. Then, in the same thought, you take it back. You absolutely will continue to complain. The scribe leans closer and whispers, taxes always rise when rumors rise. You blink. Why? Rumors stir movement. Movement stirs anxiety. Anxiety makes officials want money. That's depressingly logical. He shrugs. That's governance.
You drift forward without breaking stride, letting the warmth of the room wrap around you as the coffeehouse rearranges itself in slow midnight geometry. The long benches stretch like dark canals, the low-planked tables gleam with a thin sheen of oil, and the faint hiss from the sand-brewing hearth continues its steady punctuation of the night. You don't even notice when the talk shifts from idle murmuring to something with sharper edges, because out here, the border between casual chatter and clandestine business is thinner than the foam on your cup. A courier brushes past you first. You know he's a courier because he's trying far too hard not to seem like a courier, which is always the giveaway. His sash is tied a little too neatly, the folded note tucked under his sleeve bulges just enough to look suspicious, and his walk has all the furtive grace of someone who once tried eavesdropping on cats and failed. He sits near the back, a place where the shadows fall thickest, almost syrup-like. You follow at a leisurely pace because you're not particularly invested in secrets, but the night shift coffeehouse gently encourages you to overhear things anyway. That's the magic, or the hazard, of this place. A brazier attendant pokes the charcoal, shaking loose a burst of sparks. You pass by this miniature constellation and catch the metallic tang of heated tongs. The sound makes you think of those ASMR videos where someone taps copper bowls for an hour, but with a bit more risk of accidental singeing. You give the attendant a look that says, "Please don't set me on fire," and he replies with the universal face of someone who absolutely cannot make that promise. Near the long central table, the coffee taxes conversation has reached a quiet but energetic simmer. One old merchant insists that the newly proposed levy won't touch their district because local officials are too busy sleeping through their paperwork. You can't help smiling because that tracks. Even historians admit Ottoman bureaucracy could be both famously meticulous and famously nap-friendly. Coffee taxes themselves had a habit of fluctuating with political moods, and yes, every now and then someone tried to shut down coffee houses entirely. You glance around now, yeah, good luck with that. The night shift crowd alone would riot out of sheer denial. You slide onto a bench just as the courier you'd been following leans in to whisper to a trader. The trader is the kind of man who looks like he was born bartering, sharp eyes, nimble fingers, and a little pouch of beans he handles like holy relics. It's not unusual for beans to serve as currency in the late-night circuits here. Quality beans were contraband gold when coffee taxes rose too sharply. You hear the courier mutter something about a shipment delayed at the wharf because someone forgot the midnight stamp seal. You have no idea what that is, but you nod anyway, because pretending comprehension is part of the etiquette. A brazier attendant pokes the charcoal, shaking loose a burst of sparks. You pass by this miniature constellation and catch the metallic tang of heated tongs. The sound makes you think of those ASMR videos where someone taps copper bowls for an hour, but with a bit more risk of accidental singeing. You give the attendant a look that says, "Please don't set me on fire," and he replies with the universal face of someone who absolutely cannot make that promise. Near the long central table, the coffee taxes conversation has reached a quiet but energetic simmer. One old merchant insists that the newly proposed levy won't touch their district because local officials are too busy sleeping through their paperwork. You can't help smiling because that tracks. Even historians admit Ottoman bureaucracy could be both famously meticulous and famously nap-friendly. Coffee taxes themselves had a habit of fluctuating with political moods, and yes, every now and then someone tried to shut down coffee houses entirely. You glance around now, yeah, good luck with that. The night shift crowd alone would riot out of sheer denial. You slide onto a bench just as the courier you'd been following leans in to whisper to a trader. The trader is the kind of man who looks like he was born bartering, sharp eyes, nimble fingers, and a little pouch of beans he handles like holy relics. It's not unusual for beans to serve as currency in the late-night circuits here. Quality beans were contraband gold when coffee taxes rose too sharply. You hear the courier mutter something about a shipment delayed at the wharf because someone forgot the midnight stamp seal. You have no idea what that is, but you nod anyway, because pretending comprehension is part of the etiquette. A brazier attendant pokes the charcoal, shaking loose a burst of sparks. You pass by this miniature constellation and catch the metallic tang of heated tongs. The sound makes you think of those ASMR videos where someone taps copper bowls for an hour, but with a bit more risk of accidental singeing. You give the attendant a look that says, "Please don't set me on fire," and he replies with the universal face of someone who absolutely cannot make that promise. The night hums on. You lean back and your ears tune into multiple conversations at once, a braided rope of gossip, trade, danger, and inside jokes. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember one historian saying that coffee houses once held such sway over everyday chatter that some officials considered them schools of sedition. Historians still argue whether that was fear-mongering or a genuine reflection of how potent coffeehouse talk could be. But looking around now, seeing the tiny networks of information linking every table, every cup, every twitch of the brazier's glow, you understand why the debate continues. Your cup arrives. The Sesve serving boy sets it down with a quiet thud, and the liquid inside trembles like a tiny galaxy waiting to collapse. The aroma wafts upward, dark, grounding, rich enough to convince your brain that you've slept recently, which, let's be honest, is a lie. You take a sip, foam coats your upper lip. You resist the urge to lick it loudly. ASMR etiquette, you remind yourself. Then, just when you think you have the mood pinned down, the quirky tidbit of the night lands in your lap. A man in the corner demonstrates a news decoding spoon, a little copper utensil whose engraved patterns supposedly reveal political secrets when dipped in brewed coffee. You nearly choke. It's complete nonsense, of course, probably invented 5 days ago and passed around like a meme, but the inventor talks with such conviction that nearby patrons actually lean in. He dips the spoon, swirls, squints, and announces the governor is hiding something. Everyone nods solemnly. The janissary mutters, "We already knew that." You add a mental note that if the internet ever reaches this place, it's going to fit in right away. Meanwhile, the courier reappears, this time whispering to a poet who has absolutely no business being awake at this hour. You wander over, curious, and catch part of the exchange. Something about coded verses, smugglers using rhyming couplets to send secret directions. The poet looks both alarmed and flattered. When he recites one line, "The moon bends low to the warehouse gate," you realize it might genuinely be a navigation hint.
You clap softly. He bows as if you commissioned the whole thing. A barista pulls you aside. Not rudely, just with the practiced grace of someone who deals with night shift chaos daily. She begins explaining the unwritten coffeehouse rule you hadn't heard before. If you overhear a courier but pretend not to, you earn honorary silence credit, a kind of social currency as precious as the beans. You joke that you'll need a punch card. She laughs and says they used to have wooden tokens for that, but people kept treating them as board game pieces. You make a mental note to ask about the board game later. The night deepens, thick and velvety. Outside, a few stray cats slink along the windowsill, peeking in like judgmental chaperones. The coffeehouse lights flicker briefly. Oil wick adjustment, nothing supernatural. Probably. You settle beside the brazier once more, and this time you're not just listening passively. You can sense how everything here moves along invisible rails of habit and necessity. The traders dodge taxes to keep their goods flowing. The couriers ferry tiny ripples of news across the waking empire. The janissaries monitor gossip like it's a strategic resource. And the poets, well, the poets do whatever poets do. Someone mentions a rumor, very hush-hush, that a warehouse clerk accidentally taxed the same shipment 5 times and then blamed it on night spirits. This gets a hearty laugh, because everyone here knows the real night spirits are paperwork deadlines. A merchant beside you jokes that if bureaucrats ever discovered how efficient the night shift coffeehouse system was, they would try to tax the gossip itself. You snort. Then, regretting the loudness of the snort, you soften the sound with a gentle throat clearing, which feels more appropriate for the ASMR ambiance. Another trader arrives carrying a bag wrapped tightly in fabric. When he opens it, the faint scent of unroasted beans curls outward, like the ghost of a future brew. These are rare, premium stock from some distant hillside plantation the empire only half controls. Everyone leans in. He explains in a conspiratorial whisper that these beans bypass the usual tax checkpoints because he traveled as disguised as a fortune teller. You blink. He nods. You respect the hustle. Historians still argue whether smugglers use disguises often or whether this is one of those stories coffeehouses love to exaggerate until it became cultural truth. But right now, seeing the glint in this trader's eyes as he reenacts dramatic fortune-telling gestures, you're inclined to believe at least
You stay exactly where the note told you to, near the window, though you do it with the subtle grace of someone who definitely does not know how to look inconspicuous. You lean one elbow casually on the wooden sill, then immediately regret that pose because it feels like an overacted stage direction. You straighten up, pretend to inspect the swirling dregs at the bottom of your cup, and finally settle into a position that says, "Nothing to see here, totally normal person, please carry on." Outside, the street is still deep in shadow, that heavy pre-dawn dark that feels like someone draped indigo silk over the whole world. The lamps along the alley flicker weakly, their oil nearly gone. You can see your own reflection in the coffeehouse window, softened by condensation, haloed by the warm interior glow, and behind you, the room continues to murmur with its midnight circuitry of gossip, traders' codes, and cup-tapped signals. You take a slow breath, letting the aroma of roasted beans settle into your lungs, the way incense settles into temple stone. You're trying to stay relaxed, ASMR appropriate, but there's a little pulse of anticipation under your ribs. After all, someone went out of their way to hand you a note. You, specifically. You're flattered, confused, and about 40% convinced this will turn out to be a prank where a cat jumps on the windowsill and steals your pastry. But no cat appears. Not yet. Instead, the first hint of dawn arrives, though arrives might be too assertive a verb. It's more like the darkness quietly loosens its grip, letting a soft gray seep upward from the horizon. You lean closer to the glass. You can see the shapes of buildings now, the slanted roofs, the narrow eaves, the little balconies cluttered with drying laundry that tell silent stories of their own. and below them, the quiet shuffle of early workers making their way toward the wharf district. Behind you, the coffeehouse slowly shifts into its transitional state. Night patrons coil back into silence, finishing their last sips. The baristas move with the choreographed calm of people who've done this 1,000 times. The brazier attendant starts banking the coals. Even the janissary, still dipping his bread in coffee like an absolute menace, gathers his things with a tired sigh. And then, it happens. A runner appears outside the window, darting down the alley with the nimble urgency of someone who has been awake far longer than you have. He's small, wiry, wrapped in a faded cloak that flaps behind him like a warning flag. You wouldn't have noticed him at all if you hadn't been told to watch for something. He slows as he passes the coffeehouse, glancing toward the door. Just a quick flick of the eyes, and that's when you see it. A thin band of blue ink smeared across his left wrist. You blink. Ink pigments. The same pigments the tailor mentioned earlier. The ones arriving before sunrise. The ones supposedly being used as covert bribes in minor administrative circles. The runner catches your eye through the window, just for a heartbeat, and in that moment, you understand. This coffeehouse isn't just a place where news is whispered. It's one of the relay points, a nexus, a low-lit, caffeine-scented artery of information. The runner taps the window once, soft, deliberate, then continues down the alley, disappearing around a corner. You turn around slowly. Several patrons are watching you, not unkindly, just with the quiet acknowledgement of people who have now extended you temporary membership in a club you didn't know existed. The courier nods once. The poet gives you a knowing little smirk. The trader with the fortune-teller disguise wiggles his eyebrows dramatically. You appreciate his commitment. You glance at the barista, who's polishing a brass cup with the serene air of someone completely unfazed. "So," you whisper, "does that kind of thing happen often?" She shrugs. "Only on days ending in day." One of your mandatory jokes lands neatly in your mind, so you let it drift out with a lazy smile. "I guess that means business is consistent." There are a few chuckles. Even the janissary snorts, though the snort is so deep it sounds like he swallowed an entire cupboard. You're just about to ask what you're expected to do next when the brazier attendant approaches again, this time carrying a fresh cup of coffee. He offers it like a ceremonial object, which is probably accurate. He says in a low murmur, "You should have this for the dawn. It helps you interpret things." You accept it reverently, though you strongly suspect that interpret is coffeehouse code for stay awake long enough to not miss the next clue. Still, you sip, and yes, this one tastes different. Sharper, with a smoky undertone that reminds you of burnt sugar and old stories. Dawn spreads across the city, slow and deliberate. With each minute, the shapes outside sharpen further. You watch as the first shopkeepers open shutters, the baker's apprentices haul sacks of flour, and the flower seller arranges his fragile morning blooms. The air cools for a moment, the kind of chill that slips down your spine like a playful prank. Inside, the night community shifts. Some head home, cloaks wrapped tightly around them. Some stay when new patrons arrive. The early morning scribes, apprentices, and fishermen who prefer their coffee strong enough to resurrect ancient empires. You remain at the window, sipping slowly, letting the dawn unmask the stories of the night. And then, one final whisper reaches you. It comes not from a courier, nor from a trader, nor from a poet performing covert intelligence work through rhyme. It comes from the barista herself. She leans in, speaking soft enough that you feel the breath more than hear the words. "You saw what you needed to see. That's all Dawn ever asks." You nod, unsure whether that's profound or just very well-timed caffeine wisdom. But you feel lighter and calmer, and strangely woven into the fabric of this place. A final fact drifts into your awareness, something you'd heard earlier. Ottoman dawn rituals often revolved around transitions, not abrupt endings. People didn't snap from night to morning. They eased into it, letting the softness carry them across. Historians still argue whether this gentle gradient was a cultural choice or simply the rhythm of a world lit by lamps and sun instead of neon and screens. But as your eyes follow the rising light, you think maybe the debate misses the point. Maybe the truth is what you're living right now. A slow shift, a whispered handover, a peaceful unwinding of darkness into day. And because the Night Shift Coffeehouse honors transitions, you feel the story easing its pace too. Like a long exhale after hours of quiet tension. You let your gaze soften. You take one more sip, and you let dawn finish unmasking itself, one gentle breath at a time. You stay by the window as the last traces of night loosen their hold, letting that steady, pale gold of early morning settle around you. The noise inside the coffeehouse fades into a soft, pleasant murmur, less a collection of conversations, and more a single warm hum, like a familiar lullaby stitched into the walls. Every movement slows, every sound rounds at the edges. Even the barista steps become a kind of soothing rhythm, steady and unhurried, as if the whole room has decided to match your breathing. You take one more sip from your cup, and the warmth spreads gently through your chest, drifting outward in long, relaxed waves. The window glass cools beneath your fingertips, grounding you in the soft stillness of the moment. Outside, the city is no longer a place of shadows and secrets. It's a quiet landscape waking with patience, stretching its rooftops toward the widening sky. The last few patrons gather their belongings without rush, drifting like silhouettes through thinning lantern light. Somewhere in the back, the brazier gives a calm, settling pop, almost like a whispered goodnight disguised as good morning. You let the sound wash over you. There's no urgency here, no demands, no hidden messages waiting to be decoded. Just the gentle understanding that you've reached the end of the night's long story. Your eyes grow heavier, lids dipping lower with each slow breath. The world softens into worn shapes and muted colors. The stories you've carried through the night loosen, unravel, and finally drift away like steam rising from a cooling cup. And as the first full ray of sunlight finally touches the window, you let yourself sink into that quiet glow. Safe, steady, and ready for rest.